Welcome to Latent Treasures, a uniquely uplifting podcast filled with inspiring guests to brighten your week. Our show takes inspiration from a lesser-known quote from C.S. Lewis. What we want is not more little books about Christianity, but more little books by Christians on other subjects, with their Christianity latent. While I love books, this is 2020. And let's face it, audio is a lot easier to produce. But you are more than welcome to think of our little podcast as a bunch of little books about various topics lived by ordinary people. But these people are quite extraordinary in the way their faith drives them and fuels their journey. Journeys on which they're making profound impacts on everyone around them. We hope you'll be blessed by these stories and recognize that inside each of us is the ability to be similarly extraordinary. If you like our show, please subscribe. And if you find any individual show special, please like it and share it freely. Our guests today are chaplains with their local county fire department. They have had that role for roughly 17 years now. Prior to that, they were in leadership and ministry of their church for over 20 years, and one might think that they have always had this great foundation of faith and theology which led them down this path, but you'll soon learn their experience was quite the opposite. In case you were under the impression that we can script out our lives and plan all the plot twists ourselves, you might want to stay tuned in. Both Larry and Dianne's lives are a triumphant example of how wonderful and powerful God's love for each of us is. Both experienced significant trauma as children. Both had exposure to quote-unquote church as children too, but the messages never connected. Both of them were about to switch cities with each other on the exact same day as one joined the Navy and the other was headed to university. But as God's sovereignty would have it, the university plans changed, and that allowed the two of them to meet shortly thereafter. And while we'd love to say the rest of their story is history after they met, their relationship was anything but smooth in the early years. This story has so many lessons of value. I have a feeling almost anyone who will ever hear it will learn from and relate to multiple aspects of their stories. This show is special, not only in the ways that it shows God's presence in our lives and how much God cares for us, but also because Larry and Dianne are good friends of mine. In fact, they are my uncle and aunt respectively, and both have had a personal impact in my faith development as well, as I got to enjoy a few years in their youth ministry when I was a young lad. But now, without further ado, please welcome Larry and Dianne Huffman. I want to welcome two close friends and family members of mine this episode. We have Larry and Dianne Huffman, who are my aunt and uncle, actually. And one, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's really cool. You guys obviously have been a big part of my life and my spiritual journey since middle school age, essentially. But I have realized as kind of planning a little bit for our talk today that there's a lot of your early life history that I don't even know, like what got you to the point where you at that point in time were involved in youth leadership. But you guys are great examples of people who live out their faith and wanted to dig in and, if I get too nosy, tell me, but wanted to dig into kind of how you guys got from, A to Z so far. And I know that there's lots of life left. So we'll talk about that too. But yeah, thank you for joining us and sharing your stories and being willing to be open about, all the goods and the bads along the way. But as a kind of framing point, it's 2020. We're getting towards the end of this fantastically fun 2020 year, right? And all the COVID craziness. Share right now kind of where you guys are at, what you are up to, and then we'll kind of rewind and go back to childhood and bring people up to date.
2020. Can we forget this year? That would be the best.
With the right meds, I'm sure we could.
Yeah. They say it's kind of going to be the new cuss word, 2020.
Yeah.
But it's been a challenging year. We got involved in the little quarantine period and staying at home for about almost 3 months. We got a huge walking regime in during that time, and we're chaplains with the one of the local fire departments in our county, and so we were unable to get into the stations. Our chief, I don't know if he was concerned for us or thought maybe we would cross-contaminate because we go to all the stations, and so they were shut down for just shift level occupancy at the stations. So
did that make you have to operate and do your job as chaplains remotely from a distance? Like they're inside the building, you're outside, and I can't be very private that way. So I'd imagine virtual would probably make more sense.
Yeah, we made a lot of phone calls and emails to individuals that way. We still responded to the community call outs and stuff. So if there was some sort of a crisis, a death, we could go on the calls, but we just couldn't go in and do our job being around the stations. And a
lot of standing outside on those calls, since PPE was kind of in shortage then before it got distributed. We didn't have vent masks or any of those kinds of things. So going into a home where there was potentially infection was discouraged and even restricted for us. So we had to meet with grieving families outside, and that wasn't real fun, especially in February and March.
Yeah, many of the chaplains in our area had to respond via telephone and console grieving families over the phone. I mean, I just can't even imagine trying to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we were able to at least respond and be in person.
Yeah. For those who don't know, because I don't even know fully, I'm pretty familiar with the role of a chaplain, but if you could just kind of give 30,000 foot level, or even if you think the details help, what exactly does a chaplain do?
Our primary job, and I think most chaplains, their primary focus will be the personnel, the frontline guys or their police officers, their families. We make sure that their well-being is, their behavioral, their mental health is up. There's a phrase, I don't know if it's a diagnosis or not, but compassion fatigue can set in. And so we try to help them just to walk through the mundane. I mean, there are the calls that just come out. We have BLS calls, which is basic life support, and ALS, advanced life support. And 90% of the calls are BLS, and people have gotten into the habit of overusing 911 for back pain, toe pain, sore throat. I mean, all sorts of things. Elderly people that are just lonely have called 911. I really don't have any issues. I just wanted to see somebody, but if they call 911 and they say something like, I'm just not feeling well, then we'll send somebody to that call. And so some of those calls can really build up and wear on, the older guys, because they've done it for 20 plus years. And so helping them to just look at humanity, I guess, at a different level than just, this is making me so angry that we have to do these calls. We're not firefighters anymore.
babysitters,
basically. And so it's it's a challenge to keep them encouraged. And in today's arena that we're in with the COVID, every call they have to gown up. They have to full PPE. We have APR respirator masks that we wear. They have to wear these gowns. I mean, they have to don everything and then duff everything, and it's a pain for them, and it gets irritating. So we try to keep them encouraged. We take them cookies. We tell them jokes.
We cook dinner for them.
That's cool. And what typically draws, I'm trying to make this more broad because I, again, know a little bit about your background in ministry. So is that typically the only type of person who would be drawn to the chaplain role, or what draws somebody, or if you guys have insight into other people's choices to go into the role of a chaplain, where do those people kind of come from?
Well, there are hospital chaplains, and that's strictly all they do is walk around wards and hallways and hospitals and visit sick people, which is a completely different field of chaplaincy than what we do.
I learned this year the NFL football teams have chaplains. I had no idea. Sports teams have chaplains.
College teams have chaplains.
I did not know that.
A lot of major corporations have chaplains.
Really?
Cruise ships have chaplains. That's the gig I want now. I want to get on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
Any cruise corporations out there looking for a chaplain? We have interested candidates.
Yeah. No, but there's hospice chaplains, which is really I don't think you get so connected to people, and at the end of life, that's all you would see. I mean, the calls, when we're called out, we don't get called to the happy calls. We don't get called to, baby births or the piñata swinging parties. And, it's tragic when we are called. People are having the worst day of their life and experiencing the saddest part of life for them. And so it takes a real grace. I mean, people ask us, how can you do your job? And it's like, I don't know how we do our job. It's just a grace that God has given us to be able to kind of let that stuff roll off your back like water on a duck. It just, some of it gets in there. If there's something that brings like if your parents have passed and you go on a call that's similar, or that guy looks like my dad, or that was my mom, those kind of get inside of you and wear on you. And children, those are tough.
Yeah.
But
both of us have experienced death in our families. I experienced a lot of grief growing up, and so I think that God used that for me as a springboard into what we're doing now. And so my father passed away when I was 20, a month before my wedding. And so that shifted me into this other place. And I now know what PTSD is because I was textbook. And but God doesn't waste anything.
Yeah.
So, he used that for me to be able to minister to people now who are suffering those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
So it kind of begs the question, obviously you're dealing with people who are in a massive period of strain and difficulty, and that's your day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like chaplains need chaplains.
Mm-hmm.
And I know inside the ministry in general, pastors often, and part of the reason why pastors often burn out before they even hit 5 years is just because of the difficulty of it, besides, the teaching part and the community growing part. There's a lot of hard elements of being in ministry that deal with stuff that's so emotionally draining. Are there things like that? Are there support groups and chaplains groups where you all support each other?
Well, there are some organizations. There is a international, actually, the Federation of Fire Chaplains that we belong to. For police, there's the
ICPC.
ICPC, International Conference of Police Chaplains.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a help there. You can reach out to fellow chaplains that are there. Here locally where we live, we have the Tacoma Pierce County Chaplaincy, and it's an organization that helps agencies find their chaplains. And so that's and then just getting to know your local chaplains that are in other departments. So we're able to, hey man, can we get a cup? Got to talk.
Yeah.
But we're a unique animal in the respect that we are a married couple in this
absolutely.
together. And so I think a lot of our healing comes from praying together as a husband and wife after we've experienced there's a difference between trauma and vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is if I sit here and tell you about a call we just went on. But firsthand trauma is we experienced this together. We went into a call where we both smelled the smells, heard the screams, saw what we saw together. And so it wouldn't just be vicariously me telling somebody else about it. We were in it together. And so because of that, it can be, it's kind of a two-edged sword sometimes, even because like the Bible says, when one is down, he's got the other to pick him up. Sometimes we are down together.
Yeah.
And in those instances, we have to search out either our pastor or other chaplains. Mm-hmm. But usually we help each other. And then just going back to the station where those firefighters were present on that call before we got there, and them telling us what their experiences were when they arrived, because they saw and felt everything that we did. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes just talking with other people is the biggest help. And that's typically what we do.
Yeah. That's interesting. Do you see yourselves in this role for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think so. Contracts are contracts. We're contracted with our department to provide the service that we provide. So as long as they renew it, we'll continue. So
yeah. Not all chaplains are contracted though. Yeah. And that's why I said we're kind of a unique animal in the respect that it is a paid position for us, and we're required to put in so many hours per year. So we are paid for that, not a lot, but our firefighters also contribute donations. And if it weren't for those donations, we wouldn't be able to do what we do.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. And are you doing anything else in conjunction with that, or is that pretty much a full-time, massive responsibility?
That's pretty much it. I mean, we do some small groups things in our church. Dianne has a small group with some young ladies, and I have leading a men's group at our church. And so, yeah.
Very cool.
We do spend time with a lot of retired firefighters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So keep their morale up, because, when they quit their job, that's been their sense of purpose and identity for years. Mm-hmm. Now it just all comes to a screeching halt, and a lot of them sink into depression.
Yeah, they don't necessarily miss the work; they miss the guys. They miss being at the station,
whole culture,
hanging out, because you live together, 9 days a month for 24 hours a day, and you get pretty close to your crew. And
yeah.
So.
Yeah. And is that officially part of being a chaplain, or is that stuff you guys just do is, kind of to bolster their psychology and, like you said, kind of help with the transition and dealing with retirement?
I think everybody should keep up on their retired guys. It's just...
Not all chaplains do that. It's not that important to them, but it's kind of a priority for us.
Yeah.
Because we were close friends with a lot of the retirees. We've been doing this for almost 17 years. So when we started, some of those men were the same age we are right now. And they retired years ago because they only put in like 25 or 30 years and then they're done. Chaplains just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, and so we check back on those that we were friends with, and just to see how they're doing, because they impacted our life, and so we just want to keep their hearts encouraged.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, like I said, interestingly enough, I should probably evaluate this on a wider scale. I don't know much about either of your childhoods. So, I don't know if you want to go one at a time or go side by side, but let's go back to youth as far as y'all remember and or want to share. And what was life like for each of you growing up? Was it typical suburban? Was it, I think, Dianne, you're from San Diego, right? And Larry, I know you're from, were you born in the Northwest?
No, I was born in Kansas.
You were? Okay, so I didn't know when that transition happened.
No longer there, Dorothy.
We're not there anymore.
Yeah, boy, I'm not sure where we are anymore.
We can start with her.
Okay. Well, like you said, I was born in San Diego. My mom was a cosmetics rep and a model for Mass Factor, and my father was a chiropractor and a nutritionist and a pulmonary specialist. So we grew up in the heart of San Diego with my dad being a doctor, and I attended private school, all girls school, my whole life. And when I was 5, my mom was a severe alcoholic, and my dad thought that his love would change that. He married her being an alcoholic, and that never changed. In fact, it progressively got worse, even with my birth and the birth of my little sister. My mom never was able to maintain sobriety. And so when I was 5, my father filed for divorce. My mom had a history of unfaithfulness in the marriage, and she was married twice before my dad and went on to marry several times after my father. Just a really messed up lady. And so my father, back in the day, it was unheard of for a man to raise his children, let alone 2 little girls. But because of the chronic situation that existed in their marriage, he was awarded custody of my sister and I. And so he technically raised us. And the summer that their divorce became final, my sister and I were sent to stay with our auntie and uncle in San Diego for the entire summer. And when we came back, our mom was gone. All the pictures of her were down in our house. All of her clothing, everything of my mother was gone. And we had a Mexican nanny that was a part-time live-in nanny. She and her husband resided in Tijuana, and he would bring her over Sunday nights, and she would live with us from Sunday night through Friday night and go home on the weekends. And so she was non-English speaking.
Oh my
so
goodness.
We had to learn Spanish real quick, because she wouldn't accommodate my sister and I on any level unless we spoke Spanish to her. So we would ask for something in English or point to something, and she would say, no, tell me in Spanish. She'd say it in Spanish. So we had to learn how to speak Spanish really fast. But from that point on, it was just day to day going to school. My dad's doctor's office was attached to our home. So he would come in and out of the office during the day to check on us when we were home. And my mom lived outside of the home. And for the first year after the divorce, we could not see her at all. And then after that, she was awarded visitation and then gradually weekend custody.
So were you guys brought along understanding wise, or like did he have it? Was that you're 5, right? But was that explained, like, or was this just kind of like, we'll explain later when you can understand it better?
It was explained in a way I think that was age appropriate. We came home, like I said, our auntie's house, to a house that was bare of our mom.
Yeah.
And when I asked my dad what had happened, he said, the only way I can tell you right now, he says, Mom is gone and you won't be seeing her for a year. And of course, I didn't understand the concept of a year, what that looked like or felt like. But he said, when I asked him why she was gone, he said, well, you know, Mom has a lot of problems and Mom is sick. And the pain of Mommy being here at home would be greater than the pain of her being gone. So Mommy's safe. She's, you know, she's in a house with other women that are kind of sick like she is. And in a year, you'll get to see your mom. But in the meantime, we're just going to go on with life as normal as possible. And so that was our understanding until that year went by and we started to be able to see our mom. She could come to our house and we could visit with her and talk with her, but then she would have to leave. And then that went on for a while. And then she remarried, and that we got to start spending weekends with her, or overnighters with her in her house. And so it was a gradual reintroduction to life with our mom outside of our home.
Yeah. Now, were you placed in private schools because the education was better, or was this a faith-based decision, or do you know why that was?
I think it was multiple reasons. My dad put me in Catholic school and my little sister in Catholic, education, just because of the quality of education, but also because it was the parish that we were raised in. And so we would go to that church and we were familiar with the priests and the nuns. And so it was as much like family as we could possibly have familiarity. So the same nuns that we would see, that I had grown up seeing in church, were now my teachers.
Okay.
In the school. So my dad wanted to kind of maintain that level of normality for us.
Okay. All right. So eventually, a few years in, you start to have, like you said, some nights at your mom's with her new husband. And did that continue that way, or did you ever? What was your relationship with your mom like? Was it close? Was it, did it grow closer despite her alcoholism, or?
Well, I was always my mother's mother. I grew up with very, very codependent, very enabling, because I was always worried about her. There were nights when my mom and dad were still married that she wouldn't come home. And so I had to lay in bed and listen to their fights when she would come home drunk. And doors would slam and things would be said. And so, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It still hurts a little bit when I talk about it. But I always took care of my mom even till I was an adult, because she had no self-respect. So she made decisions, even in our little neighborhood, our community that we lived in, where there were bars. She would frequent those bars, and she was known, she was 86th a lot out of those bars because she would get drunk and they would throw her out. And so even when I got older and I was working in that little community and held down a job, my boss would, one of my bosses where I worked at a local dime store, would come in and say, well, your mom's out on the sidewalk and needs a taxi. And so I would have to shut down my register and go take care of my mother, because I always took care of my mother, always worried about her, always protected her, was fiercely protective of her because people talked about her. And she was a beautiful model, but over time we just watched her gradually erode. And she went from being, in fact, she was such a high profile individual in the community that she was known by some celebrities who would had yachts docked in San Diego Harbor, and there were these lavish parties that she would get invited to and she would take me to. And so I met people, I can't mention their names, but you would know them, very well-known celebrities that I would sit on their
in that day,
back in those days, yeah. That I would be invited to these parties with her, and of course she would lie to my father and tell me that I had to lie to him. If Dad asks you about this, this is what you're supposed to tell him. So I had this one gentleman who was a movie celebrity. He had to go by the name of Mr. Jackson because I couldn't use his real name to my dad. But my dad knew who he was eventually, because one night he walked by our house trying to, I guess, see my mom or whatever. And my dad and I just happened to be sitting on the porch, and I saw him coming toward our house, and he didn't see us, but we saw him. And I said, "Oh, there's Mommy's friend, Mr. Jackson." And my dad said, "Really? Well, how do you know him?" So I told my dad, "Well, we go on his big boat and we have lots of parties, and I color pages on his boat, and they give me lots of Shirley Temples to drink." And so that kind of things really accelerated from that point, because my dad hired a private investigator and had my mom followed, and that's when everything fell apart. And it went into a very terrible bloodbath of a divorce and custody battles, and just it went on for, like I said, that we knew of, the duration of an entire summer when we were sent away to stay with my auntie and uncle.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you ever have a chance to understand or get to know your mom's childhood story and what kind of led her to become like that?
Yeah. My mom was raised in the Dalles, Oregon, and her mother owned a dress shop just down the road from a boarding school that my mother was placed in when she was young, because my mother from day one was not wanted. She was the youngest of 4 sisters, and she was always told, "You were a mistake. We didn't plan on you." And so from the time that she was young, she was raised by the nuns in a Catholic boarding school until she was old enough to leave there. And my grandpa at the time was a sheriff up in Anchorage, Alaska, and she was up there with him, and they became alcoholics together. And shortly thereafter, my grandpa died, and he was my mother's, my mother dearly, dearly loved him. And he was like my mom's, he stuck up for her, and he was he fiercely loved my mom, but saw the injustices that were going on with my grandmother, who was very much a controller. And I also loved my grandma too. I had a very close relationship with her because at the time I didn't understand the level of control that was going on between she and my mother. And they had a very embittered relationship, terrible relationship. And so my mom became an alcoholic with my grandpa, who was the sheriff. And when he passed away, she moved to Anacortes and got married. Her first marriage was there. And then marriages cycle began. Yeah, the cycle began of alcoholism and adultery and divorce and remarriage. And we were the only 2 that we know of. My sister and I were the only 2 children that she birthed.
Yeah. Wow. So where does that kind of leave us timeline-wise? How long did you remain in a relationship with her, like your whole childhood and into your adulthood?
Mm-hmm. It was up and down. It was when she was sober, I dearly, dearly loved her. My mother could be so much fun, and she was a very intelligent, not so wise, but very intelligent lady. And because she made a lot of really stupid decisions in her life. And there were times, even as a child, I would look at her and think, I think what she's doing isn't good. I mean, and for instance, one day we went into Sears and Roebuck, which was a department store in San Diego, and I saw this life size, it was this little statue of a monkey that was the size of me. And it was holding a cup, and if you put a penny in the cup, it would flip the penny. And I was looking at this monkey and I liked it. And next thing you know, my mom and I are walking out of the store with this monkey, and she had it under her arm. And I said, Mama, I think you're supposed to pay for that. And she said, no, we're fine. And about the time we got out to the car, the guy, the security came and grabbed her by the arm and took us both into this office upstairs at the store and called my dad. And my dad had to come pay for it, or I don't remember what happened, but my mom did a lot of really dumb things like that were careless and stupid. And I just remember thinking as a child, this isn't right. My mama shouldn't be doing this. Even when she was meeting with Mr. Jackson at these parties, I knew that something then wasn't right. And so I was always looking out for her, always trying to think for her. And I would say, Mom, I don't think this is a good thing. We're going to get in trouble. It was always, never it was going to be, you're going to get in trouble. It's always, we're going to get in trouble, because I was with her when some of these things would happen. And I questioned the logic in a lot of things. And even after Larry and I got married, this roller coaster of a life was continuing. And so he probably wondered a month into our marriage, what the heck did I get myself into? And I said, I told you, life with my mother is crazy.
Okay, so we'll pause there. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Larry, let's go back to your beginnings, and we'll go up until the two of you met, and we'll bring it to a fork in the river where you guys are together.
I always want to use Steve Martin's line from his movie. I was born a poor black child, but like, you'll probably delete that. But
oh no.
Well, I don't. I know I was born in Wichita, Kansas, and we moved to the Seattle area when I was 1. My dad worked for Boeing, and so we moved out here for a new position for him. So my upbringing has always been here in the Northwest.
So was Boeing in Kansas?
Yes, in Wichita. Yeah,
okay.
They had a plant there.
Okay.
I don't remember a lot of my childhood. I remember a Columbus Day storm where we lived in Tacoma, and I thought big branches had fallen out of trees. My dad said, nah, they were just twigs. It looked pretty big to me. But I didn't grow up in the private school sector. I went to public school, moved around a lot. We lived in several different homes in Tacoma. I think things changed. I had a little sister, and when I was 12, she was 8, and we were living in the house, I think you remember, on Cushman, and she had cystic fibrosis, and back in those days, they didn't have much of a treatment or less a cure for it. And so she one day left and went to the hospital, and about a week later, my mom and dad came back home without her, and consequently she had passed away. And my introduction to grief
Yeah.
at a young age, I mean, to the point that, you know, and you act differently with all of those things happening in your life. Or, you know, kids would come up, and one kid in particular, in the neighborhood came up and said, I heard your sister died. And I go, no, she didn't. And I punched him in the face, and because I just didn't know how to respond to it. And but in those, so I think in this growing up thing, you asked about how we, I went to church every Sunday, and in our particular denomination church that we went to, we did communion every Sunday. And every day it would pass by, I'd reach for the cup and the cracker, and I'd get my hand smacked saying, you're not old enough. And I went to Sunday school every Sunday. And I think up until, I think right after I was 12, you could be baptized and you could take communion. And so we'll get into all of that here on Wrap It Differently. But so in that process of growing up and having the tragedy of my sister dying and going to church, my mom and dad, it was tough. I mean, they both worked out of the home. And so I was pretty much raised by my sisters. Things were pretty controlled in the home, that TV knobs were taken, cords were taken. If you didn't get the radio station turned back to the country station by the time they got home, I mean, there was a penalty to be paid. My dad's action or showing of love was occasionally giving me $20. That's when I got older. Just didn't have a real structured family life, I guess. Growing up in the Ozzie and Harriet days, we didn't have that at home. It was pretty dysfunctional.
Was it that way prior to your sister passing as well, or was it all along?
It seemed a little more homey before, but yeah, after that, it just kind of, maybe that trauma, and she wasn't the first child that my mom and dad lost. Before I was born, I had another brother and sister that both died of cystic fibrosis. One before my oldest sister, Sonia, and one right after Sonia. They had a son and daughter that died, and then Glenda was the last one born and who had the disease. Both positive genes from my mom and dad affected her. And so it really went downhill, I think, after that, because that's where I really begin the vivid memories of the dysfunction happening. But back to the going to church, I think that's why they had us go to church every Sunday, and sometimes just the kids went and my mom and dad didn't go. But when I was 12, that was before that. I guess I need to get into a trauma story for myself. When I was younger, my mom and dad took in these 3 military guys that lived above us in one of our homes. We had a duplex that we were renting, and upstairs was another area, and they rented it out. And one of them, I don't even know what age it was where I had to have been maybe 9, 10.
I don't know.
I don't know the age, but he began molesting me, and that went on probably through junior high. He got married and had his own children, but then continued that process with me. And so I was delusional as to why all of this was happening, and trying to make sense out of my childhood.
I assume that means, and I hate to ask this, I feel like I should know better or I should know the answer, so I shouldn't have to ask it, but
Yeah.
I assume that means nobody knew.
Nobody knew. I think his wife ended up finding it out, and because I remember her, I think, walking in one time, or he was gone too long alone with me, and I think she started putting the puzzle pieces together, and I don't know if I was the only one that he was doing that with, but they ended up getting a divorce, and he, in turn became a homosexual in that. And but so I don't know if that caused anything. I don't know if she ever said anything to the other two friends that they were all together with in the military, or if she ever said anything to mom and dad. I don't know. But in that, I was older and getting into high school, trying to help my dad do things around the house. I would just always be ridiculed for not doing a good enough job. Trying to throw wood, because we heated with wood after we got away from coal. I grew up in a coal house. I would be told I needed to grow some muscles. I was a piss poor excuse for a man. I'll never amount to anything in life. And so in that, at the same time, growing up, going to church, going to Sunday school, hearing all of the stories of Noah and Moses and Abraham, and never really ever hearing anything about Jesus and dying on the cross and being, I could repent for my sins and have salvation. And so when I turned 12 and I could get baptized, I got baptized on the juice and crackers, because I didn't know any other reason that I was being baptized. And so when the pastor asked, "Do you know why you're being baptized?" I said, "Absolutely." And he didn't question it. And had he, I would have said, "So I can have darn juice and crackers when it comes by in front of me," because I didn't know any other reason why to be baptized. So I don't know where church went in our life, because we kind of just quit going. I think there was a big fallout because my dad was a deacon there and something happened and we just quit going altogether.
Egos.
Kind of one of those awkward things. But fast forward, growing up in the house, I remember your father and your sister. No, my sister, your mom.
That's your sister.
My sister. I remember them dating and a big fight happening, and Paula leaving and moving to Wisconsin, where you came along. And there was a big gap in life where we didn't talk with my sister, your mom.
Because I was the whole family.
The whole family. Mm-hmm. It was, I still, all I remember that day that something happened was that your dad said something mean to my mom, and I picked up my Hot Wheel track and smacked him in the face with it. So I remember.
Jeez.
So, protecting my mom, I guess. So I do remember traveling to Wisconsin to visit Ken and Paula here. And I don't know I think when Tammy was born, we came back there. And but all of that is such a blur.
Yeah. So she left at roughly 17, 18, if I recall the stories. My mom to
I think
Wisconsin.
She was, golly, I think she was 17. I think she just graduated high school, and she was, I think, a candy striper at the hospital. That's how she met your dad.
Yeah. And so you were, how many years younger are you?
We just figured this out. She just turned 70. 69. So I'm 4 years young. No, shoot.
63.
I'm three, so 6 years younger.
Okay, so you were just starting high school, or not even finishing middle school, 13?
Yeah, I was in middle school, yeah. Because she said, I remember for Christmas that year, I bought you a Tonka truck. And I go, really?
Wow. So, but it's also the same time that you lost your sister. You both lost your sister, because you said that was 12 and 8.
Yeah, I was 12. So, yeah, I think it was right before, maybe the year before she left is when Glenda died.
Wow, okay. But you guys had stopped as a family going to church prior to that even?
Prior to that, yeah.
Okay, so when you were experiencing abuse, you were already no longer at church?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it was sporadic going.
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah.
Okay. So what was your, and to a degree I didn't ask you this either, Dianne, but what were your social lives like growing up? Did you have a lot of friends? Were you involved in sports? Were you just busy working around to try and help out?
Yeah, I tried sports. Yeah, I mean you
were involved in band.
Yeah, I got into music. My mom and dad bought me a trumpet, and so I got involved in band and switched through all of the brass instruments from the trumpet to the tuba, and ended up settling on the baritone through the last year of junior high and all through high school. So,
okay.
And the school I happened to go to back in that day was really, marching bands were the thing. And so we performed at all of our football games, our basketball games, the pep band and stuff. And we marched in the parades, and we were known for just the stellar band. We won all of our contests that we went to. And so I think that's what kept me going to school. If it wasn't for that in my life, I don't think I would have made it through school.
Wow. So dealing with obviously a lot of difficulty, how much did you look forward to your future end, or what did you envision your future adulthood to be like back then, or was it too slammed with difficulty to even think that far?
I didn't really think much about adulthood. Being a high school product of the 70s, there was this green stuff that was going around.
Which is now legal.
Which is now legal in the state of Washington. But, and it's not your grandma's pot today. It's from what I heard.
My understanding also. When Cheech and Chong tell you to stay away from the stuff today, there's something going on.
Yeah.
That's bad juju. When I graduated, life was just a whirlwind. I did not know what to do with myself, but I did have this enough inside of me that if I didn't get out of Tacoma, my life, I don't think I was going to exist very long, because it was on a real spiral track down. And so I just started going around to recruiting stations and taking the entrance exams into any of the military that would take me. And the Navy took me. And an interesting fact of the sovereignty of God, because neither one of us at the time were really focused on anything spiritual.
You kind of jumped
I am?
a little bit. Yeah.
Well, he asked about the adulthood. So.
Okay.
But anyway, that was my childhood into adulthood.
No, it's good. So finish your thought there. Not that you were thinking that much about the spiritual realm, but as a sovereign example.
But So the sovereignty of God, the weekend that I joined, when I raised my hand and I packed up my stuff and flew to San Diego to join the Navy, that same weekend, Dianne had a full ride scholarship to the University of Puget Sound right here in Tacoma. Her bags were packed, walking out the front door with her dad. But because he had a chronic illness, he had asthma really bad his whole life. And being raised by him, as she stated earlier, as they were walking out the door, she turned around and said, "Dad, I can't leave you. I don't want to go." So the sovereignty of God, we would have literally crisscrossed the coast, and she would have been up here, I would have been down there, and we probably would have never ever met.
Wow.
So that was October of 75, and we met sometime in
76.
late 76, and we were engaged shortly after that. And in 78, I was gone in the military most of 77 into 78, and like she said earlier, her father passed away a month before our wedding, and we almost didn't get married because of that.
Yeah.
But
as a postponement, or your world's turned upside down, you don't know what to do, just where was that decision at that time?
Probably would maybe not have ever gotten married if it hadn't been for her cousin and a very, very dear friend of her father's, who told her, "This is what Ben would want. You need to get married." So we did.
Wow. So how did you meet?
Well, I started attending a college military career group at a Baptist church, First Baptist Church in San Diego. And the only reason I did is because I truly found what baptism was all about when I was in the Navy, on board ship on a 9-month Westpac. And I met this guy that was just smiles all the time. And I thought, I don't know what he's taken, but I want to get some of what he's on. And so I asked him one night, I know there's nothing really illegal on board, but I think you got something, and this really sucks being out here. I need some happy. He goes, "I got you." He goes, we're going to meet tonight down in this little section of the boat, and would you come down there? Said, "All right, I'll be there." Well, it ended up being Jesus that they were on. That's the only way they could be as happy as they were out in the middle of the ocean with nothing around. But I truly got saved that night, understanding what baptism was all about. And it was the sign, John 3:16, that was shared with me that I had never heard all through growing up, going to Sunday school. I never heard that somebody died for me to take my place, that I could have eternal life. And I wanted that. I knew that's what I wanted that night. And so met other guys on board ship and other ships when we pull into port, and they told me about this place downtown San Diego, and I started going. And about 6 months later,
This place was a church.
she was, the church. She was
The First
pushed into
Baptist Church. Sorry, we'll put the links together for anybody not paying close attention.
So 6 months later, she was pushed into the room, and there she was. So I'll let her tell her part of it.
All right, so First Baptist Church. I got that part. We know that's where you eventually meet. So, and how old were you in 70? Well, yeah, how old were you at the time, Dianne?
When we met?
Yeah.
18?
18?
No, we were
17?
76. We were 19.
19.
Okay. So you're through high school now. What was, kind of finish out your childhood a little bit? What was your childhood like? You got a full ride to UPS, or University of Puget Sound, so you had to do well in school, probably because of the authority of your father and the demands. But what was the late years of your childhood like?
Um, well, high school, it kind of, I was bullied very badly in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, because those same girls that I started first grade with stayed with me clear through 12th grade. And so there was sixth, seventh, and eighth were not good years for me. We graduated from eighth grade and had to move on to the high school, all girl high school. And so,
Was it just because of really rough age, middle school, for bullying and people trying to kind of find their own identity, and people are just mean as heck in middle school to begin with, or did any of that have to do with other stuff going on in family life that was just kind of quote unquote haunting you at school too?
well, a lot of those families were, like I said, part of our church parish. And when my mom and dad divorced, there was a lot of talk.
Gotcha.
And so growing up without a mom really in the family, I was one of the only girls who didn't have the, like the Ozzie and Harriet um, upbringing. And so I was taunted because of that. Girls would say things about my mother. Um, I don't know, it was just kind of, girls were just mean. And so we graduated eighth grade, went on to Rosary High School in San Diego with some of those same girls. And that began a downward spiral for me as far as, even though I was immersed in my studies, and it was really, really important for me to maintain the highest GPA possible, I needed to, there was also a weird combination of self-loathing going on. And I was very conscious of my weight, and started taking diet pills. And I found that diet pills, well, speed and, mini whites, crisscrosses kept me awake enough at night to where I could study and get, I was in all AP programs in school. So that helped me with my studies and get into advanced placement. And my goal was to eventually get into broadcast journalism, which was the scholarship that I was awarded for UPS. And so writing and journaling was my big thing. My mom was a very good writer, and so that was kind of our bent, this thing we shared that we had in common. And so she would always help me with writing. I was in charge of the school newspaper in high school, and so we wrote articles and I edited and a lot of that kind of stuff. So while all that's going on, I'm also doing a lot of amphetamines, and it graduated from mini whites and speed into cocaine eventually. And I became addicted to cocaine by the time I was in 11th grade. I was snorting lines of coke every single day, and very dependent on it. And graduated high school, and like I said, or like Larry said, I decided to not take advantage of my scholarship. And it was after graduation that things really began to spiral downward for me. My addiction got really bad, and I saw my life going. I thought I was going to die. And in that, I had fallen in love with this guy in high school. He was from the boys' school, and we began dating, and we dated for couple of years. And anyway, we ended up breaking up because the relationship was extremely abusive. He was abusive physically. I was abusive emotionally because I was high all the time. And we ended up breaking up, and it was shortly after that I attempted suicide. And so the first time was just a drug overdose, and nothing happened because of it. I mean, they don't have Narcan like they do these days, where they can pull you out of an overdose. But The second time that I attempted, my father, because like I said, his office was attached to our home, he had a medication safe in his office, and I knew the code to get into it. So he was gone one night, and I decided, because my life was pointless now, I had no purpose. School was over. I didn't go to college in Washington like I had wanted to. My boyfriend broke up with me. My dad's out on a date. My sister's gone with a friend, and I was home by myself, very, very depressed. I went into the safe in his office and brought out a bottle of Quaaludes, and I was going to just end my life. And I came out to the living room from my dad's office, and I was sitting in the dark, just contemplating, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go over, I'm going to take all of these pills, and then I'm just going to go to bed and go to sleep and never wake up. And as I was getting ready to get up to the kitchen sink to swallow all these pills, an audible voice in the room that sounded like surround sound said, in a scripture I had never heard before, well, it wasn't a scripture really, but it was, I knew enough to know it was God, and it wasn't scary. It was total peace. I heard, your life is not your own. You have been bought with a price. And I froze in my tracks. And I thought, did I imagine that? And then this total peace washed over me. And it was like this, it could only have been God, this assurance inside of me that I knew that everything was going to work out. It wasn't as horrific as I was imagining inside of myself. This supernatural peace just started flowing through me. And I knew enough then to know that it was God. So I went and put the pills back, and where I washed them down the drain. I can't remember what I did after that. I don't remember. But it was not long after that my dad, he had remained single our entire growing up years, because he didn't want to take my sister and I through another hellacious potential divorce. So he remained single to raise us. And he started going out on these, he was a dancer, like ballroom dancer. And he would go and to this dance club, and he would, meet ladies and they would dance. Well, he came home one night, and I had a party at our house, and I was pretty drunk. And he had told me about her, and he said, I'm going to be bringing her home soon to meet you. And so I knew it was pretty serious, but I didn't know it was going to be that night. So I'm cleaning up the house.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have been drunk.
Yeah. So I'm busy cleaning up the house because I knew he was going to be home soon. And he shows up, and I'm still pretty drunk. And he said, I brought my friend home for you to meet. And I said, and I had to pull myself together really fast. By this time, everybody's gone, and the house was pretty clean. And he went out to the car and brought her in. And he said, this is Janine. I'd like you to meet her. Well, that night, she told me, she said, we were sitting down hours later. It was probably 2:00 in the morning. We had been talking, and she said, do you believe in Jesus? I said, yeah. And she said, do you know what being born again is? I said, nope, never heard of it. And she said, well, born again is when you invite Jesus into your life and into your heart, and he takes over your life. And I said, well, how does he do that? And she says, well, you just start praying, and you ask him, you invite him, and he'll come in, and he'll take over your life, and you will start living for him, and he will make changes in your life. And it was at that point that I remember the night that God told me in the living room, your life is not your own. You've been bought with a price. And I flashed back to that, and I thought, that's interesting. And I said, my dad never knew about that. And I said, so when she was telling me about Jesus dying on the cross, and I said, is that a price? And she said, absolutely. That's a price, that your life he purchased your life. And I connected the dots. And I said, oh, I get it. So she took me through this little book about self being on the throne and all of that stuff. And so she said, do you want to pray this thing called the sinner's prayer? And I said, okay. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I needed it. And I said, okay. So she led me in this prayer, and I asked Jesus into my life. And she went home. My dad and I, he went in his bedroom. I went in my bedroom. We went to sleep. And I don't know how long I'd been asleep, but I woke up suddenly out of sleep, and I thought I was falling out of my bed. Like I felt like I was falling. And I grabbed the side of my bed. And when I opened up my eyes, my room was full of light. There wasn't one place that was brighter than another. It's just that this room was filled up with light from nowhere. And this same peace that washed over me the night I was going to end my life is that same feeling. And I recognized that feeling, and I knew it was God. And it lasted, I don't know how long it lasted, for hours. And finally the light went away. And by this time I am wide awake. And I thought, what just happened to me? What happened? I got up to go to the bathroom, and I hear my dad wrestling around in the bedroom, and he's sitting on the edge of his bed, and he goes, Dianne, are you all right? And I said, yeah, what are you doing awake? And he said, well, when you're done, come in here. So I went in and sat next to him on the bed, and he'd been crying. And I said, Daddy, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And he said, tell me about what just happened to you. And I said, how do you know anything happened? And he goes, because the Lord told me he was going to visit you tonight. And I said, he did? And he goes, yep. And so I've been awake praying for you. And I said, well, this light came into my room and filled the room up, and it woke me up. And really nothing happened other than this unexplainable light and this just like a waterfall of peace just rushing through my body. And then it went away. And he said, well, I knew that was going to happen. So fast forward, shortly after that, it turns out that his girlfriend is the secretary of this church in San Diego. And she says, we got to get you some new friends, because my friends were not real good friends. She said, so what would you think about going to a college career group at the church where I work and where I attend? And this is the church your dad has been coming to. I said, yeah, I'm not really into church. And she said, well, just try it. And I did not want to go be with a bunch of nerd church kids. That's what I thought, a bunch of nerds. So she said, well, let's just give it a try. So Sunday morning rolls around, and they wake my sister and I up, and I get ready for church, and we go to this room, and she literally opens the door and pushes me in this room, and we're late. So this Sunday school class had already started, and it's filled with people, filled with sailors, filled with college kids, filled with students. It's filled with people. And this guy is talking to everybody in there. And they shut the door, and I'm standing there at the door, scared out of my mind. Thought I was going to faint. My knees were knocking so hard. And apparently Kent, the group leader, had been told that I would be coming. So he said, hi, Dianne, come on in. And I said, how do you know my name? And he said, well, we knew you'd be coming. So apparently Janine or my dad had filled him in because he was part of the church staff. So they were expecting me. So
I wasn't. But that's all it took was her walking in the room, and I was done.
I wasn't done at that point. I was scared out of my mind. But long story short, after that, I started growing in the Lord. I started attending, it was called The Family, this college group. We started attending all the family events together in big groups. Friday nights were like a night when we would all go out as a group and do fun things. And this was fantastic. I mean, all these kids that I thought were nerds turn out to be the best friends. And this one girl, just literally discipled me. She took me under her wing, and she was a very mature Christian, but my age. And she started coming over to my house, and we would meet every week in downtown San Diego at Tom Lai's, which was a seafood restaurant. And we would have a Bible study out on the lawn together, and then we would eat dinner together at Tom Lai's. And she took me through this book called Disciples Are Made, Not Born. And so that's where my walk with God began. And then one Sunday, Larry asked me after church, and I didn't know him very well. I had seen him and I knew I was attracted to him, but I had also seen him with a lot of girls around him all the time. And I thought, well,
what's not to love?
And one girl in particular that was with him a lot. So I just pretty much dismissed all of it. And so he asked me after church one day, he said, well, would you like to go to the beach next week after church? And I was a surfer and I was always at the beach. So I said, heck yeah, do you know how to surf? And he said no. And I said, well,
that's not exactly true. She goes, I'll have to ask my father.
And then I'll have to ask my dad, because my dad was very, very strict Italian. And one of the things I forgot to say when I was growing up is big Italian family, lots of Italian parties, weddings, Christmases, big Italian stuff. So anyway, halfway through the week, Larry calls me and he goes, well, there's been a slight change in plan. Oh, I asked my dad, I'm expecting a no, but because I knew how my dad felt about sailors. I said, is there any chance? I said, there's this guy named Larry Huffman in our college group, and he asked me to go to the beach with him next Sunday after church. Would I be able to do that? And he said, sure, I don't have a problem with that. My dad never said, sure, I don't have a problem with that. Especially, and I said, well, you realize he's in the Navy. Yeah, I know. And my little sister's standing next to me and she goes, what? And so midweek, I'm planning on going to the beach next Sunday after church. He calls and he goes, well, there's been a slight change in plans. And so I have to be at home for something, but I live in an apartment with 3 other guys. And I thought maybe rather than going to the beach, that you would want to come over and swim in the pool. And I said, my dad will never let me come to your apartment, especially because you live with a bunch of sailors. He says, well, ask. So at dinner that night, I said, Dad, you know that Larry guy that wants me to go to the beach with him on Sunday? Well, he called and said there's been this change in plans, and he's wondering if I could go to his apartment after church Sunday instead and swim in the pool. He goes, all right. I suppose that would be all right. And my little sister's across she goes, Dad, are you kidding me? You're just going to let her go with this guy you don't even know, and blah, blah, blah. And he let me go. So what's the next step in this thing? We started falling in love, and I didn't want to be in a relationship. Honest, all I knew was I have this newfound love in Jesus, and I just want to nurture this relationship with Jesus because it's so amazing. And I don't want any distractions. So I began to pray because I knew I was falling in love. I knew it. And I prayed one night. I was on my bed crying, and I said, God, I don't want to be in another sour relationship. I don't want this. And so if you have a future for me with this man, because I had heard about throwing in a fleece. I had read about it in the Bible that David threw in a fleece. Would
times.
You have him ask my dad for my hand in marriage before he ever talks to me about it? Well, he didn't know I prayed that prayer. So, whoever it was that threw in the fleece, Gideon threw in the fleece. So my dad comes out of the office one night, and Larry's over, and we're getting ready for dinner, and he says, hey, Ben, can I talk to you a minute? And he said, sure. So they walk out of the room with my stepmom because my dad had married this woman. And they're back in the bedroom for a very long time, and I am sweating bullets. I'm thinking, great, he's told my dad that everything that I've shared with him about my past and blah, blah, blah. And so my dad comes out and he says, Dianne, can we see you in the bedroom? And I said, okay. So I opened the door, and Larry's standing there. Janine's sitting on the edge of the bed, and my dad's been crying. And he says, Larry has asked me for your hand in marriage, and I have given him my blessing. And I was floored because I had prayed that prayer to the Lord. And then he officially proposed to me after that. But I said, Dad, I'm really confused because we've only known each other for 3 months. And normally you don't even let me go on dates, but now you're giving me permission to marry this guy. And he says, well, I'm going to tell you something. He said a year ago, because Larry sang in the choir at the church. He said during one of our worship services, we were singing, and God said to me, see that man up there in the back row? He is, I have ordained him to be your daughter's husband, and I want you to pray toward that end. So for an entire year before Larry even asked me out, my dad knew about this and never said anything. And so that day in the bedroom, he explained all of this to me, and I'm just like, wow, God. I mean, God just showed himself so tangibly to me, to us at that time. I was floored. I'd never seen God move like that in a way that was so real. And so he said, I would want you to court for a year, approximately a year. He said, I know Larry's getting ready to leave on a Westpac to the Marshall Islands. He was being deployed to isolation duty for 9 months. So he said, when he gets back, we'll have a wedding. So we got engaged, and that was in October. In May, he's overseas in the Marshall Islands, and he falls and breaks his ankle. And I get a phone call that he is being medevaced home early, and our wedding was supposed to be June 24th. So, but in May, here it was approaching May 1st, he's coming home early. So he gets home, and 3 days later, my dad goes into respiratory arrest one morning, and he dies in my arms. And all I could think of was, we have this wedding coming up in a month. What do we do? I can't marry Larry now. I can't do this. My dad's gone. My life is gone. My dad was my life. And so we go through this grief period, and everybody is saying, Dianne, you have to go through with this wedding. You have to have this wedding. Ben would want you to be married because, after all, look what led up to it. God told him that you were going to marry him. And so here we go, having this wedding that you're in, and you and your sister. And pretty much the rest is history. We get married, and we start our life together. A year later, our first baby was born, and shortly after that, we left San Diego to move to Washington.
Yeah.
So,
for those listening, I know that God never speaks to us that's anything contrary to his word. And when Dianne was saying earlier about God speaking to her in that moment of her wanting to take her life, he spoke to her out of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. It basically says, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God, which she didn't know at that time. But you are not your own. You have been bought with a price. And so that's where God spoke to her at. And so I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you were in a private religious school, and maybe some of the stuff that was taught, especially theologically, had worked its way into your subconscious, through those many years too, but that none of it took root. And I similarly, would absolutely say I grew up Christian, right? I was always essentially, most of my memory included church on a regular basis and being taught, et cetera, et cetera. But it never really moved from brain to heart in a personal relationship until later. And it's just interesting that, like you said, so many things, and even like you said, Larry, so many things that you had heard didn't include gospel, didn't include,
Right.
and or just the lines never connected, right? Or the dots
Right.
never connected. But that's incredibly enlightening, especially for me. But hopefully our listeners just certainly can appreciate, the tumultuous nature of life in general, that can still lead you into the same spot, and what powerful ways Jesus worked and God worked through the Spirit to bring you to that point. So now did you remain in the Navy for a while? Did you? I don't recall at all what happened.
Yeah, I
after
had
the Navy.
2.5 more years, I believe, or a year and a half to go in the Navy, and that was trying on our marriage, being newlyweds. One, having the tragedy of her father's death, right, on the precursor of our marriage. Not knowing how to be married. We didn't have classes. I think we might have met with the associate pastor of the church maybe 2 or 3 times just to go over some stuff about marriage. But not having good role models in our life as to what marriage was supposed to be, I took on the role of what I knew, which was being angry and controlling. It's what I grew up with. So I guess that's what I'm supposed to be as a husband. I need to become angry and controlling. Because when you're courting, you're just so with it. You love, you appreciate, you encourage. And once you're married, everything's wrong. You didn't do that right. My mom didn't make meatloaf like that. What are you doing? But all the things that you just flash back to because you don't know how to be married. And that's, to me, one of the wonders of God, that he takes 2 broken misfits and brings us together. We didn't grow up together. People, I don't know how long you've courted or knew your new bride, but we just met. And yeah, we knew each other for a year, but we didn't date or court. When we finally started individually dating, here's a fun fact for the First Baptist Church of San Diego back in the day. We had a little saying in the group, the differences between the girls and the family and garbage cans. The garbage cans got taken out once a week. Nobody dated in the group. We broke the mold. We got married, and then the floodgates opened, and there were like 20 weddings in the next 2 years. So everybody just said, "Whoa, let's do this."
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
So,
were you deployed at all during that? Oh,
Huh?
yeah, for sure. Were you deployed
no.
at all during those next 2 years?
No, thankfully I had shore duty. I was on the Naval Amphibious Base, and I got the joy of being a barracks cleaner.
Lucky you.
But I was assigned to a boat. I was on landing craft, and so I was assigned to a boat that happened to be in dry dock. And not only did I have to clean barracks, but I had to also be on this boat. And my duty was like 2 on and 1 off, is because we didn't have enough people to pull watches. And so I worked for 48 hours, and then I got 1 day off, and then 48 gone 1 day. And so she was always coming to the base to see me, and always getting pulled over by the MPs because she didn't stop at a white painted stop sign on the road. There weren't the poles with stop signs on them. Didn't stop at colors because she didn't know she was supposed to. And he goes, "Who the heck is your husband?" So I got in trouble for her. And so, but it was, young and dumb and then love, and you just make it work.
That's awesome. Wow. Okay. So early years in the marriage, then, what is there a way to summarize kind of how you two grew together, or apart? If it was still that time where you're just the angry, pissed off husband, because that's what you knew.
Moved up here.
Yeah. Married in June. I come home from doing something. I don't know what it was. It was in the evening. Well, it was after work, I guess. I came home from the base. Once we got married and I could get off the base,
3 months later,
we got an apartment. And 3 months after we were married, I come home and thinking, well, she's just working late because she worked at a drugstore. And it came to 10 o'clock. It came to 2 o'clock. It came to the next morning, and no wifey in the house. And I'm sick in my stomach. I don't know what's happening. Don't have cell phones. Don't have pagers. Don't have anything except for landlines back in the 70s. And because I didn't know anything, and the trauma of her father passing, the high school boyfriend came back into the picture, came to where she was working, and convinced her into come back to normal. You're not in normal. And so she left. And I ended up leaving the apartment and living with our associate pastor and his family for about 2 months, because I just couldn't. I was falling apart. I didn't know what to do with myself. And so he walked me through the process. About a month and a half, I started going into the store. I mean, he just said, you need to go live life. And so I started living life. I got back involved with the singles group, which I wasn't really single, but I needed friends again. And so I got back involved with all of those people. And I started going into the store to see her and, just tell her I loved her. And I think what broke the ice in that is one time I was waiting for her to come to work because I knew who was bringing her to work.
Because I had moved in with my old boyfriend.
And I so wanted to be that guy. So when they pulled up for her to get, I just pulled my car right up in front of them so he couldn't go anywhere. And I just wanted to yard him out of that car and beat him to a pulp right in front of her. But I thought, oh, wait a minute, it's my anger that made her leave. So I waited till everybody get out of the car and I said, I need to talk to you. So I talked to her for a few minutes, and then I took him down to the edge of the building where she worked, and I just talked to him. And I don't even remember what I said to him, but we started dating after that day again. She would come over, I would pick her up, and we just would go out to dinners. And 3 months after she left, she came back.
Because, and it was 2 days after this had happened, I was praying one morning, and I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but my heart was so messed up that I just justified my decision. But I was praying one morning, and I can't even remember the scripture I read, but the Lord told me, if you go back to Larry out of obedience to me and love me more, I will give you the love that you need for him. Don't worry about that part right now. Love me more. And that just, I mean, it was to me at the moment, it was profound, because his anger had turned the switch off in my heart, and I didn't feel love for him. And I was right in the throes of knowing what I know now. PTSD, which is where you make a lot of irrational decisions when you've had trauma to your life and you aren't thinking clearly. But God broke through those layers of justification and told me, if you love me most, I will give you the love that you need for that man. And so I left. I told Mark, I'm out of here. I'm going to go be a wife to the man that I married, and I'm going to do the right thing. Well, how can you do that? Because God told me to. How did God tell you to? I don't know. I just know he did. And so I went back to Larry. And so not long after that, we got pregnant, and along came Nick, and we moved up to Washington and started attending a church in Washington where we grew for the next 30 years of our life. Our 35 we just be the very church that I didn't want to be in, because it was different than anything I had ever experienced as a church in my entire life, eventually became the church that we co-pastored for several years. So, but God has very unique ways of working things like that out.
Yeah. Wow.
But the early years of our marriage up here were tumultuous because of family.
It's
family
not a tumultuous family. That's a rumor.
Yeah, we almost didn't make it because of that too. There were just pressures from family that almost sent me back to San Diego. But God.
And there were times that I was packing her bag to send her back to San Diego.
Yeah.
Wow.
But through it all, God has just been amazing.
Yeah.
So at what point did you guys decide that you wanted to be involved in ministry?
I never did. It wasn't my choice.
I don't know. Your great-grandma, Grandma Rowe from Oklahoma, I knew she was always praying for me because I was the only boy in the family. And she would always send me little Billy Graham booklets, or send me little clippings of stuff. And so she always prayed for me. And she told me one time, my prayer for you, is to be a minister. But I just dismissed all of that because I didn't know what a minister was. I mean, even going to church, I didn't know the minister was the minister. It was just a word as far as I knew. But I always had this thought of God in my head. I mean, even in high school, even when I was doing, drugs and stuff, I just always had an awareness of God. Why, I don't know, but I just did. And I mean, even people who would come up and talk to a group of friends and, they just, who was a friend who, found Christ in that era, and he would come up and start talking to us, and another friend would go, "Oh, buzz off, man. We don't want to hear that." And I was like, well, man, why are you being so mean to him? I mean, he found something that's great. You don't want to hear about it? Not that I wanted to hear about it, but I wasn't going to be mean to the guy. And so, yeah, ministry, I think, just happened by being at the church, like Dianne said. We ended up being the youth pastors of the church. Well, it all started by just getting interested in the church when Dianne, began coming back she didn't attend for 6 months with me, but she started coming back because she was seeing the change in me. She was seeing that God was actually doing something in my life and in my heart and softening me. And I mean, just because she came back, the anger and the control didn't subside. I mean, it didn't go away. I tried to, lasso it and rein it in as much as I could, but until I learned something else, it's the only thing I could fall back on. But I did my best, I think, to.
Man, I don't know. Say that again. Until you learned something different, you did your best.
Yeah.
I don't know if people ever contemplate. I don't know. That's a profound sentence right there. I think that we can't change ourselves by ourselves.
Right. You have to learn something different.
Well, and I don't even think it was a learning thing. I think it was God began to do these gradual exchanges.
Yeah. Well, I think to me that's a learning thing, a healing thing. You learn a new way of life.
A different reality, yeah, for sure.
Different reality.
And we've had people pray for some of our struggles, personality struggles and anger issues and, rejection issues and there's been a lot of prayer investment into us to get us to where we are today.
Yeah, we've had to have a lot of work.
A lot.
Re-sculpting our lives. And, that's the beautiful thing about being that lump of clay that God can mold and fashion into what he wants you to be. We've not that we've arrived in all of it, but we've discovered our original design, what we were designed for. We were designed to be a husband and wife. We were designed to be parents. We were designed to be grandparents. We were designed to be the likeness and the image of Christ here on earth. And that's been a struggle and a process, and it's still a process today.
Mm-hmm.
But
did you feel openly or consciously, to a degree I want to use the word surrendered to it? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, did you feel like you saw areas in your life that you weren't satisfied with, that you consciously thought, I'm going to see what God does with this? Or was it something that just kind of naturally happened without you necessarily being in agreement of it?
Probably a little bit of both. Because God's able to put a bit in your mouth.
I was just thinking that about a bit.
And pull you, and because he says to take his yoke upon us. It's easy. And I mean, when you're training a younger ox, you yoke that ox to a trained ox, because the younger ox is, oh, squirrel, or, oh, look over there, a flower. But you train them to just get in that trudge and just go. And I think that's what God's done with us. I mean, we've gotten into that yoke, and I've wanted to run. I've wanted to rear my head. I've wanted to, but God just keeps, jerking me back into this lane, and, just toeing the hoe, I guess. And
when we were asked about youth ministry, about taking over the youth group at our church,
well, we weren't asked. We were told.
We were basically told. I went off the deep end because I told myself I'm never going to be a pastor's wife. I don't want to be married to a pastor. And I've learned one thing with God: you never say never. And
we were at a youth event, and we were just helping the youth pastor at the time, just with the group. So we were at this youth camp, and one night we were just hanging out after one of the sessions, like almost the last night, and they were talking, and they go, hey, by the way, we, Mark is doing this. Mark is the guy that we were helping. Him and his wife were moving into this advancement, and you guys are taking over. I went, taking over what? Well, you're going to be the youth pastors. I went, what? Really? I mean, we just both took off. I mean, we didn't run away. We just didn't understand it. I mean, why didn't somebody tell us this was going to happen? And,
or
why
ask.
would God just,
ask.
Hey, you guys interested? And,
long story short.
Yeah. But we jumped in with both feet, and
God just began this equipping and grooming process through ministry, that he began leading worship at the church. I started attending Bible studies, then teaching Bible studies. And it was this process of the bit being in our mouths, and God pulling the reins back a lot. And when God pulls the reins and you bite down on the bit, it hurts. And so God, especially for me, because I was kicking against the goads the whole time, I realized just surrender and see what happens.
Yeah.
Quit stiffening your neck against God, because I was just fighting him tooth and nail for everything. I did not want to be in ministry.
Is there a
And
particular reason why?
I had seen some things that pastors' wives had gone through and elders' wives had gone through, and I didn't want my marriage tested like that. I didn't want to be tested as a woman and as a mother like that and a wife. I just watched some of the leadership in our church going through struggles, and I didn't want to be part of that. And I somehow thought, if you're not part of that, you won't have struggles.
It's like living in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
You know, everybody sees everything about you.
Yeah.
When you're in the ministry. And
church gossip, you hear people talking about stuff, and I just didn't want any of that drama in my life. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. And so I just kind of hardened up against God. But after a while, God challenged me to surrender. And it was never in a, in a more than I could handle kind of way. It was always little pieces at a time as I was able to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very interesting. And so, that was quite a while ago. Gosh, I don't want to count the years. A long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long time ago.
And you've obviously continued, like you said, to be molded and shaped and grown, and that's an ongoing process. And I think to a degree it's an awesome piece, because so much of the active Christian church, especially in America, one of the missing pieces is for the congregants to develop their role in ministry, right? So much of the American church is consumer. It's like going to a movie, right?
Yep.
Suck it in, be filled with it, learn from it, try and grow from it.
Get fat from it.
But those leadership, those discipleship, those evangelism skills, those what are your ministry gifts are rarely developed in the bulk of the Christian church. And it is interesting that you weren't asked, or it wasn't a conversation. It was just thrust upon you, so that's kind of odd. But on the bright side, those skills and gifts have been developed through time, and obviously it's cool to see where they've gone. Is there a way, or maybe spend a little bit of time kind of sharing, since your involvement started, what the path was from youth ministry through pastoring that church to obviously now you're 17 years into chaplaincy, where you guys want to go? Obviously, we know we want chaplaincy on a cruise. That'd be great, cruise liner. But spend a little bit of time kind of talking about that evolution and how that shaped your marriage and or parenthood along the route.
Parenthood.
Wow. Well, I think just being willing to, I just keep an ear to Father and what he's saying. We never used the youth ministry as somewhat used as a stepping stone ministry. Springboard. I'm going to start here and work my way up. Our intentions was we're happy where we are. We love kids. We love youthfulness. That's why, we were youth pastors for over 18 years doing the ministry, and
including Campus Life, Youth for Christ, and some Young Life.
Yeah. It got to a point where it was God that, because it was a battle. I kept telling our pastor at the time, he goes, well, I want you to kind of start focusing on some young married couples. And so we tried, and just the pulling, we couldn't focus anymore on just the youth. And so I told him, look, I just want to be the youth pastor. That's all I want to do. But God kept bringing couples in, and it's like, Lord, I don't want that. I want the youth. We just want the kids. We were having fun. I mean, we had a great thing going, and he wouldn't stop bringing in. And so we had another couple with us in the youth ministry, and we kind of started handing them some reins of it, and we started doing the couples stuff. And eventually, when we couldn't do the overnighters anymore,
youth overnighters were killing us.
We thought, well,
church lockdowns, and
we better maybe it's time for the old folks to step aside here. And I guess when you can't be relevant, and not that we wanted to have relevancy in the culture, but kids change. We had a fantastic thing happening with the goth movement. We had the black trench coats, the black nails, the long black hair, the safety pins. I mean, we had oodles of those kids coming to our youth ministry, and all the other youth pastors were, how are you getting them?
How are you keeping them?
We just love them. We love them right where they are. We don't tell them they got to change. We let God change them. We're just going to love them. And
we don't fill them up with a bunch of rules, because they're running from rules.
Yeah.
You just love them and kind of help steer them a little bit. But because of the acceptance.
But they all had horrible home lives. We asked him, well, why do you come here? And he goes, well, because you love us and accept us. I go, bingo.
And then we almost lost the church, because some of the kids in the youth group who had been brought up in the church, the kids that were all, the homeschool kids and all of those kinds of kids, their parents were saying, well, started calling the pastor and telling him, well, we're pulling out of the church because we don't want our kids involved in that riffraff over there. And, one of the moms said, well, I'm taking my daughter out of your youth group because of who you're allowing in. And I said, well, if you think we're going to apologize for who God is bringing, then maybe you should take your daughter out, because if they can't come safely to church and be accepted here, where can they go? If they ought to be accepted anywhere, it's here. So what started happening was, not only were those kids coming on Wednesday nights to youth group, but then they started showing up for Sunday mornings at church. And for a while, they'd be sitting in the back of the pew playing Dungeons and Dragons and, passing notes. And they started wearing their headphones and listening to, their goth music and stuff, but they were there. And, the church people were not happy about it, but they saw
it's that darn Larry and Dianne. We're bringing them in.
The rebels. We were pretty rogue, but it was just like you said, living, latent, being a latent treasure, where you are accepting the island of misfit toys. You have to love those that nobody else accepts. Yeah. And wants to invest in. Those are the diamonds in the rough.
Yeah. Well, I think it might have been a Casting Crow song or whatever, but the price was too high to say no to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, what God has done for us in our life, who are we to not return that in some small way?
Absolutely. I mean, we were probably in our culture just as out there as
I was.
They were in their culture,
I was crazy chick.
So,
so I loved the crazies, because I was a crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still am in some ways.
Yeah. But we moved from there. Didn't really want to. We just saw ourselves as
evolution,
kind of staying put, and
one of the kids in our one of the couples that we turned the youth group over to took a test for West Pierce Fire and became a firefighter for Lakewood back in the day. And he approached us one day and said, hey, our chaplain has gone on to do other things. He asked Larry, what would you think about being a chaplain for the fire department? And at this time we were associate pastors. And so Larry said, well, okay, what's a chaplain do?
Well, I knew what chaplains did by being in the Navy, and they basically kind of sat in their office, and if people had trouble, they would go knock on the chaplain's office and go in and talk. And they weren't like walking around. I mean, I'm sure they did, but I mean, you never saw them going, hey buddy, how you doing today? You know, I didn't see that role in the Navy. But so I thought, well, I could sit in an office and have people come talk to me. Yeah, not that's not the role of a
Fire chaplain.
first responder chaplain. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that happened. Continued to help pastor the church for, golly, maybe 10 more years.
96.
When did I? No, that was nice. So 2005.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was laid off from the church. And no.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, that's wrong.
Okay.
2010, I was laid off from the church. And because of the economy and everything that was happening, we had the founding pastor that was still on payroll and being treated kind of as a missionary. And so finances were really being depleted. And this month, actually, coming up on the 29th of November, we had 4 Lakewood police officers that were murdered. I think people may think back and remember that.
Ambushed in a coffee shop.
And we were although we're fire chaplains, we were very involved with the police department for being Lakewood Fire and Lakewood Police. So we were highly involved in that whole ordeal, the tragedy of that, telling to the families that they had lost a loved one, involved in the memorial service at the Tacoma Dome, which was an all-day event, nationally televised. Anyway, being laid off, I had to tell the chief of the fire department that we could no longer be his chaplains because I had to go find a job. And at that time, we were basically kind of just volunteers with the fire department, getting a little stipend from the department. And so when I told him, he said, whoa, don't go do anything. Give me some time here. And so about a couple of weeks went by and we had another meeting, and that's when he made us contractual chaplains with the department. And we went through some, tumultuous times with the church itself and leaving, what I said, with our founding pastor. Him and I were kind of knocking heads. And I don't need to go in depth with any of that, but
the church dissolved.
The church eventually dissolved and was no more. And I'm not saying it dissolved because we left. We were keeping it together, but it just ended up falling apart because of his stance on some issues. And so now we're at another church, just really kind of receiving some more healing and going from all of that period of time in our life that was so tumultuous. And
to start a new church after being in the same church for 30 some years was a huge, to see that church dissolve. That was another healing that needed to happen for us because our babies were born there, baptized, married. I mean, everything happened in that. It was our life for over 30 years. And then to have it all come to a screeching halt on one Sunday when we had to tell our congregation that we could no longer serve under the leadership of the founding pastor and that we would be leaving, to hear that many people crying, they all left with us. 99% of the congregation left with us. And we started meeting at another church, which eventually we became a part of that church. But we never felt, it never gelled for us. So at one point we felt like God said, this is the end of this road. And we heard about a conference here in Fife called the Summit. And we went to the Summit, which was wonderful, absolutely wonderful Summit church conference. And we felt like God told us to plant and lay roots in this church for this season of our lives. So we've been there now for 3.5 years. And it's been wonderful.
Yeah.
We didn't, for the first 1.5 years, we didn't budge. We just got ministered to because we were just a hot mess from having lost the church in Tacoma.
Yeah.
And everybody scattered in a million different directions. And it was just a real hardship. Feels like a divorce when a church splits.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Is there any insight? I'm assuming a lot of our listeners, and maybe I'm wrong, but for any of our listeners who are part of a body and or are around people or know people who are in leadership in any kind of ministry, I think something that often isn't talked about very often is what kind of support or encouragement and or involvement the leaders need. Is there
Wow.
Is there some wisdom to share, like, best practices if you're a part of a congregation and you love your leadership team? Here's some ideas on how to love them, love on them, hold them up, besides prayer. Obviously prayer is a big one.
From a personal aspect, always be encouraging. I know you can't always be encouraging, but as pastors, we tend to be the ones that have to do the hard stuff, tell couples the hard thing. They'll come in for counseling and they'll come in for this problem, that problem, this issue. And so it wears it, because you, like being a chaplain, I mean, you see the tragedy in humanity. And the thing about being pastor is typically you have the same people in your congregation that you see on a weekly basis. And it's those same people that may return and return and return and return for the same counseling. It's the same problem. It's just a different day, if you know what I'm saying. And so I guess heed the advice that you're lovingly given, because we don't like to just hear ourselves talk when we're giving advice. I don't know where to go with that question, because I mean, we try to encourage our pastors as much as we can encourage them being pastors, being on that other side, telling them how awesome the service was, because I know there's probably somebody that says, well, that was just too loud.
Too long,
too loud. How come you didn't do this? You should have
dynamic.
said this scripture and that, I'm not that is happening. I don't know. It could be, but just being a positive influx to the body that you're in, I think, and not finding the dark cloud in the situation, but finding the silver lining. Find what's positive in what's happening, and beat that drum instead of the negativity.
Yeah.
I mean, there's policies in church. There's, well, how come we don't have ministering elders? We just got elders that go to meetings and make decisions. that's what they've chosen. I mean, that's just, why are you complaining about it? Have they done you wrong?
Church politics gets really
mean,
really sticky. It's a slippery slope at times.
Yeah.
And so if congregants can avoid the political side of churches, because that's the side that a lot of people don't see, is the things that go on behind the closed doors when church service isn't happening. It's the midweek phone calls and the meetings and in the pastor's office type of stuff. But the two things that I think of is, don't ever put your pastor, don't put him on a platform where God deserves to be. God is always to occupy that number one spot. And the minute you put your pastor in that place and put unreal expectations,
they'll let you down.
You will be sorely disappointed, because they're human.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, do not partake in or support gossip in any way,
right,
because gossip will destroy a church. You know, the tongue is a vicious, like the Bible says, and it will destroy churches. We've known of pastors that have committed suicide because of rumors. And so
loose lips
sink ships. So that's pray for your pastor and his family and support them any way you can. And if there is a problem and you feel led by God to talk to your pastor about it, be loving and be humble about it, and speak the truth in love. Like our pastor always told us, you can say anything to anybody if they know you love them. And so when something is spoken in love and your pastor honestly believes that you love him or her or them, then you can pretty much say anything that's truthful to them. And so that would be the advice I would give.
Yeah, that's good advice.
That's why she's the diplomatic one. She's better at it than I am.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, I know I've had you on for quite a while, so I apologize to a degree for taking so much of your afternoon. But this has been fascinating, and very, very beneficial. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot to relate to. But one, before I even kind of go into closing thoughts of my own, are there things that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we talk about and include? Because I'm always fearful that I don't go down some path that we really should have gone down. Anything that you're aware of, kind of top of mind, that as you think about how, I guess to a degree we haven't even talked about, how your relationship in the ministry and your career path has shaped your family life too. But we could certainly talk a bit about that. But is there anything standing out to you already that's like, oh, we really need to talk about that?
I think I would want to revisit the question you asked about getting involved in ministry or even in the chaplaincy, if people have the thought to do that. Again, it's a grace position. It's not what I understood it to be. I had no idea I would see the things we have seen in life. Even just the levels of humanity, I guess. I mean, not coming from wealth and not coming from poverty, but you just can't go in with any preconceived ideas in how this is going to be a superhero position, because it's not. It's a ministry of compassion. It's a ministry of being able to identify with the lowliest of lowly things, people,
things you never dreamt
situations.
possible.
Yeah.
It changes you. It changes the lens that how you view life.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I would recommend for anybody, any believer, but especially a believer that goes into any type of church ministry, the Lord showed me one day when I was grieving over this relationship that I had with my mother. And I wanted to always have a good relationship with my mom, but she wasn't a Christian. She was a Catholic in name only. And one day I remember I was laying on my bed crying because I wanted a relationship with my mom, and how I had these expectations of her as my mother that she never met. Always, I felt like this cloud of disappointment hung over my life because I always was disappointed. And the Lord showed me that I would go to this well, and I would lower the bucket in the well, and I would bring the bucket up, and the bucket was always empty. And every time I brought the bucket back up or lowered the bucket, I would bring it back up with the expectation that it was going to be filled to the brim with water. And it was always dry. And the Lord said, I want you to begin and see your mother as a dry well. She does not have me in her life. And you expect things from her that she is incapable of giving to you as your mom. And that changed me inside about my perspective of her. She could not give me what I was expecting. Even though she was the adult in my life, even though she was the mom in my life, she was unable to provide me with the things that I felt I deserved as a daughter, as a human. And God said, I want you to begin and bring those expectations to me. Mm-hmm. And I have continued with that through much of my life, as I have had to remember that for the family I married into, as I've had to deal with people that have not been believers, and even many that are. I mean, just because you have church people in your life does not mean you're not going to get hurt. Some of them will hurt you more than anybody else ever will. Other Christians, those who know and love God also can be those that hurt you. And so if you just look at them when hurts come and disappointments come as, well, maybe they're just having a half full day today, God. Maybe that well is dry and they can't give me what I'm needing or what I'm expecting. Then I think that will be a huge help to people.
I think that if we, and this is for me, I guess, I like to use the term anticipation rather than expectations, because I don't want to expect people to perform for me, or God to perform for me, or expect God to do something. I want to anticipate what he's going to do. I want to, be on that place where it says there's like this excitement, there's this rumble, there's this, it's a touchdown, just how we get, I'd rather not have put God in that place where he's expected to perform for me. And I think that's the same thing as your question about church and what we can do for leaders. Don't expect them to do things for you or your way, but anticipate what you can do in your church. It's kind of like, be the change you want to see. And I think that's the biggest thing I could say to anybody that's listening, just to be the change, anticipate that stuff rather than expect it.
Yeah, I certainly agree there. If people want to reach out and reach you and communicate with you, ask you questions, maybe share something personal that they feel like you might be able to relate to after hearing some of your stories, where's the best place for people to reach you if you even want to be open to that?
Sure.
We can certainly verbalize it here, and I can make sure it's in our show notes as well.
Holly, I don't know, what do you recommend? Email?
It could be email. It could be in your social media if you want people messing with your social media. If you're on social media, it
I don't know how
be-
many are staying on Facebook. So
there's a mass exodus going on right now.
That's what I keep
I tried
hearing.
MeWe, and I'm not know. I don't.
But email,
Parler looks
phone,
like Twitter.
just emails,
Yeah,
just fine too.
Yeah,
Email.
emails. I think we could do that. Definitely. They're kind of easy. Mine's L Huffman 328 at gmail.com.
All right.
And mine is D Huffman 329 at Gmail. Those are our call numbers for dispatch on the radio.
That's our fire numbers.
Awesome.
So.
Awesome. Well, I guess maybe we'll do this as a closing thought or topic, because I think it's important. Now you're grandparents too. Sorry, I just had a lot of that away from the microphone, so editing is going to be fun. But I think it's important to ask, since you guys are both parents and grandparents now, how has your faith, and obviously, like you said, Larry, a lot of your growth, you started from the time, you guys were early parents, right? Is there a way to just tell us a little bit about how your spiritual development has impacted your parenthood and grandparent development?
Wow. That's good.
Yeah. I would say this to young parents, and maybe cultures have changed for the church, but being in church leadership as young parents, boy, how do you say this without, don't be so dedicated to the church that your family life is suffering from that. That's a lesson that we learned. We asked our children when they were grown adults, how would you rate your growing up years? And to our surprise, we asked them separately of each other, because one's in Florida, one's in Minnesota. Well, one was here at the time, but our daughter's been in Florida for 19 years. But we asked them, how would you rate your growing up years? And they both said 9.5, which I was astounded with. But they said the only thing that would make it a 10 would be if we had more family time, because the church, not God, the church took the majority of our time away from us, being in leadership. And so growing in faith and understanding and realizing that and looking back, that would be a huge statement I would make to any young couple getting into ministry, is don't let the church become that, don't let it supersede your family life, because your family is what you were put on this earth for. You weren't put here for your church. You were put here for your family.
And the kids said, we wish we'd had more camping trips,
right,
more time doing fun things. And honestly, the fact that either one of them or all three of them, because what you don't know was we ended up verbally in a pretty much a gentleman's agreement adopting a boy from our youth group when he was 15 named Jack. And he lives here with his wife and 2 children now, but he came and lived with us and we finished raising him, and he went on to marry and have 2 children. So we actually have 2 sons and a daughter, and we have 8 grandchildren instead of 6. So you don't know about Jack. We haven't, maybe you do you know about? Yeah.
Did not, no.
So nobody else in the family knows about Jack either, but Jack's very much a part of our life, and
our kids know about Jack.
Yeah, our kids know. Yeah. So we actually
Who's this guy who's always here?
Who's a Jack guy?
Yeah. But the fact that the 3 of them serve God is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Because our kids were so done with church. I mean, everything that was church. And the fact that the 3 of them love God and are serving him is the grace of God.
Phenomenal.
Because it's not anything we did.
Only God.
So we cannot take credit for it. But, loving God and our children saw some of the worst things that church has to offer. Married couples that would come to our house fighting, kids when we had the youth ministry that were strung out on drugs and pregnant and all of the things. Our kids have seen it all. And we thought they'll never serve God after all this, because people have this preconceived notion that ministry and church is all good. And churches are hospitals for the spiritually sick. And so God gets the glory for what's happened with our children.
Mm-hmm.
We just tried to be the best examples that we knew at the time, given the fact that we are both from dysfunctional families.
Our pictures in Webster's dysfunction.
Wow, that's really good advice. Good insight.
I think with anything in life, even just professionals, don't let the career be, that's not what you were put here for. We're put on this earth for relationship, for building, the kingdom of heaven is relationship. It's marriage is the mirror image of Christ and his relationship with his bride, the church. And so building,
all about that. We just heard that at your wedding.
Yeah. So building the relationship, strengthening the people that are around you, encouraging, be a giver.
Salt
that's
and
why
light.
the Bible says it's better to give than to receive, because the reward in giving, you just feel so good inside, whether you ever get anything back. Of course, our selfish ambitions is we want to get, but it's giving.
Yeah.
But it's in relationships, not giving to an organization, a business, anything like that.
Yeah. And that comes back to this, this concept or this reality of the chemical nature of our humanity of, wanting to get drives our pleasure response, right? It drives those dopamine hits, and giving actually triggers our serotonin response and that actual fulfillment sense. And the difference between the two are so dramatically different. I love anytime we hear things or recognize things and can say, it's obviously a direct correlation of that same truth, right? That, when we pursue pleasure, it's temporary and we just want more. And if you keep seeking it out, you seek more until you literally hit that phase of addiction, right? Because it's a constant drive for something that can't sustain, right? It's temporary at best. Whereas those things that actually fulfill us actually reduce our desire to go chase more of it, which is weird. You'd think true happiness we'd want to keep chasing, but true happiness is so fulfilling, it doesn't make us want to chase it more because we're already fulfilled by it.
We're fulfilled by it, yeah.
But
great concept.
Yeah, I can't remember how long ago it was. Probably about a year back now. I got an opportunity to learn quite a bit about dopamine versus serotonin and the different centers and dopamine insensitivity, and how dopamine, overexposure to dopamine actually shuts down our serotonin receptors as well. So we don't even have the ability to feel happiness when it hits us. If it gets too far, and the definition of addiction is when your dopamine receptors they're shut off. They can't even receive dopamine anymore. So you can't get pleasure from something that gives pleasure typically.
And that's what happens with firefighters. They are in dopamine level all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
And that's why there's so much drinking and drugs and with first responders, because they're looking for something that will fulfill, because they're always in that heightened place.
If this marriage doesn't, the next one will.
Yeah.
If that one doesn't,
they burn through marriages. They burn through
Some do.
Some do, not all of them.
Not
Not all of
fire.
them. Not all of them. There's some.
We'll put the disclosure
really
at the
solid-
bottom.
Yeah.
Disclosure.
Despite what it may sound like. There are successful marriages in first
There
responder
are.
There are
families.
there's some
very,
wonderful
very-
marriages
a
in the
lot,
fire
yeah.
service.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Certainly
Oh, you're
enjoyed
welcome.
catching up and getting to know a whole share of your background I have never
Yeah.
heard before.
We'll turn this 2-hour, 3-hour podcast into 30 minutes from now.
Oh, it won't shrink that much, but it'll shrink a little. But yeah,
Okay.
I think podcast wise, we're only at about 220. But no, it's I don't focus a lot on time. If people don't want to listen, they won't. But I think for bringing out what needs to come out, it needs its own
Yeah.
course. So, you
Well, I
know,
hope we did okay.
you guys were great. I appreciate the fact that you're so open and everything. So thank you very much.
But we love you.
We love you too.
We'll have to hang out one of these days.
Meet your wife.
I know. Oh,
I
it's
was
been a
expecting her to
whirlwind.
walk in the door behind you. Or something.
So yeah, we definitely need to get that arranged. So once
Okay.
all the chaos calms down, we'll figure something out. And even if nothing else, we'll get on another FaceTime or something and
There you go.
go from
Do
there.
that. Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
All right, you guys. Hope
All
you
right,
have a
man, we
great
love you.
weekend. Yeah,
Yeah.
All right, you
I
too,
love you
Scott.
guys too. Talk soon.
All right, buddy. All
All
right.
right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.